This week on Queen's Conversations, join your host. This week on Queen's Conversations, join your hosts, Lucia Dragos, Noran Omar, and me, John Collins, for the next program in our series titled Neighborhood Notes. Each episode will highlight one of the unique communities in this, our most diverse borough. Today, we'll visit Flushing. Our guides include Jason Antos, Queens historian and Queens Historical Society board president; Rob McKay, Director of Public Relations, Marketing and Tourism for the Queens Economic Development Corporation; John Cho, Executive Director of the Greater Flushing Chamber of Commerce; Joe DiStefano, food writer and culinary tour guide; and Michelle Young, founder of Untapped Cities. And now, here's Queen's Conversations.
Many generations of immigrants have helped to form the distinct communities of Queens. Their backgrounds, values, and beliefs have created a vibrant mosaic of neighborhoods.
So we decided to examine what makes them unique in the middle of this, New York's most diverse borough. We call our series Neighborhood Notes.
In it, we'll be looking at the food, the culture, the history, and the people of our colorful Queens neighborhoods. Today, we'll visit Flushing, a community which truly exemplifies diversity in its every feature. First of all, let me welcome every one of our guests. Thank you for appearing today and contributing to the program. Let's begin with Jason. Jason, give us a sense of the very early history of Flushing, the first inhabitants.
Sure. Well, I want to first thank you guys for having me back on your show. I was looking forward to this. Yes, so Flushing, has an amazing history that spans almost 5 centuries. The first inhabitants of the area that we have been able to document were the Native Americans, more specifically people of the Algonquin Nation. They were Lenni Lenape speaking peoples, and they had referred to the area as Matinecock, or the place of rolling hills. And if you ever see any old photographs of Flushing before major development, you see that there are a lot of rolling hills in the area. So this is something that we have from the very, very early history of Flushing, prior to the coming of the Dutch and the English settlers. The Dutch show up at around 1626, and the name of Flushing is a Dutch word, which is Vlissingen, which means salt meadow in their language. And Flushing is a English or British corruption of the word Vlissingen. So the first Dutch show up at around 1626, with the first British coming in around 1646, 1650.
Note, and few people might know this, is that there's an important history of the fight for religious freedom that begins way back with those first Dutch inhabitants. Is that true?
Yes. So the fight for religious freedom in the New World began right here in Flushing. It was known as the Flushing Remonstrance, and it was written in the late 1650s with the participation of the Quaker community. At that time, the Director General of New Netherlands, or New Amsterdam, which was Manhattan, his name was Peter Stuyvesant. I'm sure we're all familiar with that name. He had made it a law in the colonies that he wanted one specific type of religion to dominate all, and to be an exclusively Christian religion. The Quaker community did not think that this was appropriate. So they drafted this law in opposition to Peter Stuyvesant's law. All right. And in the Flushing Remonstrance, it actually specifies Christians, it specifies Jews by name, it specifies Muslims by name, which I think is amazing because this is, 1660 Flushing, not too, there aren't large Jewish or Muslim communities in the area, but the Quakers take all of these people into consideration for the Remonstrance. The document was delivered to Peter Stuyvesant, who, as legend has it, banged his wooden leg in anger and in protest over this document, and people were actually banished from the colony because of it. When the founding fathers were drafting the Constitution, were drafting the Declaration of Independence, there was an argument as to whether religious freedom or diversity of religion should be allowed in the new country. And there was an argument that there was no precedence for such a thing. And the delegate for New York said, well, yes, there is. In Flushing, there is actually a local law known as the Flushing Remonstrance, which guarantees the right to religious freedom. And because there was a law on the books somewhere in the colonies, they were able to vote, and they had more confidence in putting such an amendment into the Constitution.
Can you just list some of the buildings that are so unique to Flushing and to New York City?
Well, downtown Flushing certainly has its share of historic buildings. We have the Bound House, the historic Bound House, which belonged to John Bound, which is from the 1660s. It is still standing to this very day. It has been beautifully restored. It is located on Bound Street, just south of Northern Boulevard. If you're heading south on Bound, it's on the left-hand side. You can't miss it. It's the 400-year-old farmhouse on the left. It's kind of hard to miss. Behind that, and that home was, as I mentioned, the residence of John Bound, who was a leader in the Society of Friends, which is the Quaker community, and was actually banished from the colony temporarily for holding meetings, Quaker meetings, religious meetings inside that home, because the Quaker faith had been outlawed or had many restrictions placed upon it by the Dutch. On the opposite side of the house, behind the house is Weeping Beach Park. On the other side of that park is the Kingsland Homestead, which is today the home of the Queens Historical Society. It is a late 1700s, early 1800s era farmhouse that was actually moved 2-3 miles down from Northern Boulevard. It was cut in sections and then brought on a flatbed to Weeping Beach Park, where it sits today, and of which I am proudly the board president of. You also have directly across the street from the Bound House is a triangular stone that says the Fox Oaks engraved on the stone. And this is where George Fox, who was the leader of the Quaker community, held a sermon in the late 1600s, and under these huge oak trees, which were known as the Fox Oaks. And legend has it that lightning struck those trees just after his sermon was delivered. And the Society of Friends, the Quaker organization, placed this beautiful stone that says the Fox Oaks on it. You have other amazing places in Flushing. You have the Quaker Meeting House, of course, which was erected in the early 1600s, I believe 1661, 1662. It is one of the oldest continuously used houses of worship in the United States. I believe it's the second oldest house of worship in America. And it's pretty much the way that you see it today is pretty much the way that it looked 360 years ago when it was first constructed.
I think, by the way, that John Cho wrote an article about that house. I wonder if we can join him in his efforts to peddle the river, and he can tell us a little bit more about the Quaker Meeting House in what is obviously a Queens Public Television first, live from a kayak.
Hi, thanks for having me. I apologize. I'm on a tour of the Flushing Creek, and I am on a kayak, and I'm listening very carefully to this discussion because I'm also a Quaker myself and worship at the Quaker Meeting House on Northern Boulevard, which was open every Sunday at 12 for worship. Right now, the services are online on Zoom, as most congregations have also done. And, I'm very proud of the fact that we are stewards of this remarkable National Historic Landmark in Flushing.
John, can you a little bit talk about, because you are executive director of the Greater Flushing Chamber of Commerce. Flushing is the fourth largest central business district in New York City. How has it changed throughout the years? Can you talk a little bit about that? And now specifically with the pandemic.
Sure. So just picking up a little bit on the history, Flushing was always a commercial center in addition to being a center for Quaker worship. The Prince nurseries, the Parsons nurseries were famous throughout the Americas. You had people from around the country coming to Flushing to pick up plantings and trees to take back to their farms and plantations, which was a central part of the agricultural economy back in the 1700s. Forwarding to the 1800s with the establishment of the Long Island Railroad and the subway station here on the number 7 line, you had an influx of Irish, Italian, and Jewish immigrants who started their own businesses here. Flushing eventually fell into some disrepair when people started to leave New York City for the suburbs, and many people say that the immigrant population of Asian Americans and Latino Americans who came after the earlier wave of European immigrants helped save Flushing in some ways. And now if you walk along Main Street, you'll see a plethora of small businesses and entrepreneurs. We have one of the highest concentrations of small businesses in New York. We have $1.5 billion in retail sales every year. It's the largest major transportation hub outside of Manhattan. The pedestrian count on Main Street and Roosevelt is only second to Times Square. As you know, during the pandemic, we suffered tremendously, not only from the general decline in our economy, but also from the attacks on Asian Americans by people who were blaming Chinese people for the pandemic. And that continues to today, unfortunately. It's put a damper on the spirits here. We would love to welcome back visitors and shoppers and people who love to see the history and the amazing cultural diversity here. And I think it will happen, but I'm asking your viewers to take a trip on the 7 train and visit our amazing restaurants and stores and support the local businesses here, because like many neighborhoods in Queens, the businesses are the heart and soul of Flushing, downtown Flushing, Queens.
continue talking a little bit about buildings and then segue to food. I'm really interested to ask Michelle about the RKO Keith Theater. I think you wrote an article about it, and I remember passing by every day and then reading an article that is going to be a glass building. But what happened to the theater, and maybe a little bit history and where that is so people would know?
In terms of where the RKO Keith Theater is located, if you are at Flushing Town Hall on Northern Boulevard or the Friends Meeting House, which was mentioned by the previous guest from the Queens Historical Society, it's really just down the street. So it's pretty much been closed since 1986, but it has a really illustrious history that goes back to 1928, and it was designed by the architect Thomas Lamb. And if you are familiar with anything about the history of theater design in New York City, Thomas Lamb is pretty much named in many of the famous theaters in Manhattan and all around the 5 boroughs. So, and the building is landmarked, both the exterior, I believe, and the interior front lobby areas. But it's been closed since 1986, went through a long period of abandonment, was purchased by a developer. And there's been a lot of community protest over the plans for it and the state of the interior. So that's really the background. I believe things are still in the works, but if you walk by, it doesn't really look like much is going on. So I would definitely just take a walk by. You can still kind of see a bit of the marquee and the architecture in the front, but it is definitely something you won't notice if you don't know it's there and know its history.
Michelle, you are the expert of abandoned places in New York City, as you're the founder of Untapped Cities of New York. I was wondering, are there any fun abandoned places in Flushing that you know of that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most well-known abandoned place, it's hard to call it abandoned now because it is being redone, and a lot of great efforts from New York City Parks and the Pavilion Paint Project and other organizations. But the New York Pavilion in Flushing Meadows is really a great, let's say, remnant of the World's Fair in 1964. So there were 2 World's Fairs in Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, 1939 and 1964 to 65. There may be some viewers here that attended the 64-65 World's Fair, and we get a lot of those on our tour of the remnants of the World's Fair in Flushing with Untapped New York. Over the past, let's say, 10 years, there's been a lot of work done to rehabilitate the pavilion, from painting it back to the American cheese color. Right now, they're doing a lot of stabilization work in order to be able to open it back up to the public in the future. So they are stabilizing the former elevators. They're doing work on the floors and other structural things. So that's one of my favorite places. I think it has such a unique design. And it's by Philip Johnson, a very well-known modernist architect. And I think anyone that's been to the World's Fair remembers that place. And it's just so recognizable, whether you're driving on the Long Island Expressway, Grand Central Parkway, or visiting the park.
One of the things that strikes you as you walk around and travel around Flushing is the variety of architectural styles of all of the buildings. One of the most noticeable is the Ganesh Temple. We've been talking about immigration, mostly Chinese and Korean, into Flushing, but there's a huge Hindu population as well, and that temple is just awe-inspiring.
We spoke earlier about the Flushing Remonstrance and the tolerance for religion, and that really ties into today. You can find the Hindu temple. You can also find the first free synagogue that's also in Flushing. And the Hindu temple is one of my favorite places because there's a hidden canteen underground, so you can get really affordable food if you just go downstairs. And of course, the exterior is very ornamented and beautiful, and there's a really interesting walkway when you go into the building. And you really feel like you've entered another world, another country for sure. And then you can finish it off with some great food.
Rob, can you talk a little bit about the cultural events and the fun things that are happening in Flushing?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I think it's important to know that we're opening up. So things really are happening, both indoors and outdoors. And we're having some pretty I would consider pretty major things happening. For example, the Tribeca Film Fest is coming to Queens this month. In fact, they'll be showing 3 films outdoors in Flushing Meadows, as well as films in Rockaway and Astoria Park. One of the films is In the Heights, which is the new the Hollywood version of a Broadway play written by the same man who wrote Hamilton. The Queens Botanical Garden is also going to have movies in their space, outdoors in their space, starting this month too. They're more children or family friendly. And the New York Hall of Science parking lot, they're showing films there. They started a while ago. Drive in. You actually drive in like you're a small town in the Midwest, and you watch a movie on a big screen. I actually watched Mamma Mia on Mother's Day with my wife and kids there. It was quite fun. It was pouring rain, and we were sitting in the car watching the big screen and listening to ABBA songs. So I think it's important to know that things are coming back. The Queens Night Market, which was incredibly popular for 3 years and then had to take a break last year, is actually coming back. I believe June 21st is its first, and that is also in behind the New York Hall of Science. They have about 70 vendors outdoors. The vendors are from everywhere. I mean, there's Burmese food. They had shark sandwiches there once. They have Argentinian food, all sorts of Asian food, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's an outdoor beer garden, and there's often live music, and they have special kid games and so on and so forth. So that's coming back. There's programming at pretty much all of the cultural nonprofits in Queens. Flushing Town Hall, which was just mentioned, is still going with mostly virtual stuff. But I think they're getting close to being able to do virtual and live stream, or live and live stream at the same time. And then I also would say, Flushing Meadow Coronas Park, it's a great place. It's a fantastic place. It's actually the 4th biggest public space in all of New York City. It's 55 acres bigger than Central Park. I think it's about 900 acres. And, it's got the Unisphere and everything else that we know, the rocket thrower thing and whatnot. And, you can rent rowboats and paddle boats there. You can rent small craft sailboats. There are all kinds of things to do. And then there's also the aquatic center with the pool, Olympic-sized swimming pool. And the urban park rangers are always giving tours. They do bird walking tours, they do history tours, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot going on. There's always a lot going on in Flushing, and without a doubt, we had a bad year last year. But I think it's important to know that we're coming back, and Flushing is open for business, open for fun, open for culture. So it's going to be a great summer. It really is. The other thing is that I just got word the other day that the U.S. Open, the tennis, they'll be live. Last year they played there, but they didn't allow fans. So this year we're going to have fans. So we got all that going, and then of course I know Joe DiStefano, your other guest, he's a big Mets fan. We've got the Mets, and Citi Field is offering a whole host of different kind of live music, including, if anyone likes the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead obviously ended a long time ago, but the continuation band, which is called Dead and Friends, they'll be there in August. So you want to listen to live music and watch, see what happens to hippies when they get older. Great chance for that. So, and then the final thing I would add is that one of the greatest things I did when my daughter graduated from high school is we took her on a boat tour of, basically Manhattan, but we left on the Skyline Princess is the name of the boat, and it has a dancing deck, it has food, everything, and you leave from the marina at Flushing. You go to the marina, you go out basically to the Statue of Liberty and back, about 3.5 hours. Absolutely great time, fantastic time. And last year they were on pause too because of COVID, but they're back. They just started, I think last weekend or maybe the weekend before that. So there's a lot of stuff to do in Flushing now. And then all the historic houses that that Jason talked about. Most of them are reopening after being closed for COVID. Some of them are having some pretty big events. I think the Bound House on June 27th is having a pretty big event. I know that the Volker Orth House, which is actually, it's technically in Murray Hill, right next to Flushing. They've now opened up again. You can look at them. There are a lot of reasons to stay in in Flushing if you live there, and there are a lot of reasons to head there if you don't live there this summer.
We have a video from a YouTuber called John Barr. He has a YouTube channel called Here Be Bar, and he covers food and experiences throughout New York City. So he recorded a video for us sharing his experience with the Flushing and the food scenes. Can we play that? And then when we come back, we'll continue.
As someone that really enjoys exploring New York City, there's very few neighborhoods that extremely excite me every time I go, and Flushing, Queens is one of them. I love the Chinatown there. You have so many different options to eat, and it's not like going to the Manhattan Chinatown or most spots in Manhattan, period, where it's extremely overpriced, full of tourists. When you go to Flushing, you know it's gonna be a lot more local. I really appreciate that. I love also the New World Mall over there. I like just that whole region. Some of the street food, which most people certainly overlook, makes Flushing very interesting for me. I also like how far away it is from most of the main attractions of New York City. To me, it's always an adventure. I live in Brooklyn now, but even when I used to come from Manhattan, going to Flushing was this amazing adventure where you're gonna eat super well, you're not gonna spend a ton of money, and you feel like you have this secret that the trendy people of New York City have no idea about. So a lot of love for Flushing, Queens.
Joe, can you give us a little brief about the food tour that you did actually in the Ganesh Temple?
The Ganesh Temple has been a staple of my Flushing food tours almost since I started giving them 10 years ago. And as Michelle mentioned, it's really like entering a complete other world. You know, it's a little bit of a walk from downtown, but I always try to include it on every tour.
Joe, I actually have a question about the Queens Night Market. Have you ever done a tour over there, or what is your favorite part about Queens Night Market?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of the Queens Night Market, and I'll be honest, when it first started, I was sort of like, well, why do I need to go there? I'm the expert on international food in Queens. I know where to find all this stuff already. And what has happened, as as Rob mentioned earlier, is it's really expanded to include a lot of interesting foods from all over. So there's food from Cambodia, Burma. As Rob mentioned, there's food from the West Indies, like the bacon shark sandwich. You know, so to taste all of that food across Queens, you know, you probably have to spend 4 days traveling around, and you know. So it's a great experience. I can't wait to see it reopen later this summer.
That's it for today's show. We'll see you next time on Queen's Conversations.